Chapter 10. Traktorstroj. The narrow dirt road leading out of Filivka was so rutted from tires and wagon wheels that I wondered how Comrade White's fancy car had been able to get through without getting stuck. Slavko and I followed the road along fields, over hills, and through ravines as the sun rose. The fields had been recently harvested, just like ours, and it made me wonder whether these farmers had been paid, or whether their wheat had been stolen like ours. As the sun came up, we saw farmers in the field or taking a cow to pasture, but none of them seemed to take particular notice of us. Once, the rhythmic sound of a trotting horse behind us nearly gave me a heart attack. I had visions of Chort on swift-footed Polit coming to drag us back to Filivka, even though that didn't really make sense. All we had to do was show the map and explain what we were doing. Working on construction for the tractor plant was helping Stalin's 5-year plan. Even a bully like Chort would understand. Yes, Mama didn't approve, but Chort wouldn't care. Unfounded or not, I was still filled with terror, so I grabbed Slavko by the shirt and dragged him down into the ditch with me, pulling a branch in front of us as camouflage. A moment later, through the leaves, I saw a ragged-looking man riding bareback. He clutched a small bundle to his chest and looked exhausted. He was a stranger, and definitely not from Filivka, but his appearance frightened me. Why did he look so desperate? Where was he from, and where was he going? "We should talk to him," whispered Slavko. I shook my head and put a finger on my lips. Slavko closed his mouth. We stayed hidden until the man was long gone. I helped Slavko back up onto the road. "Let's not complicate things for now," I said. "We should concentrate on getting to the construction site." I had packed a change of clothes for each of us, and we were wearing sturdy shoes. But as we continued, the late summer sun beat down on us, and I realized what we forgot. "We should have brought our hats," said Slavko. We kept on walking for what seemed like hours, but the landscape didn't change. I saw no large city over the horizon. My mouth was parched, and I'm sure Slavko's was as well. But the only water we had passed was a small murky swamp that would likely have made us sick, and a creek that was too treacherous to risk getting down to. When the road ahead curved in toward the windmill, barn, and smoke cottage, I said to Slavko, "There must be a village up ahead." The first farm was achingly like our own, the house with its thatch roof and the windmill on a hill beyond the barn. As we got closer, a woman stepped outside from the back door carrying a pail. She set it down at the water pump and began to fill it. I didn't know her name, so how would I address her? Would I call her Comrade or Pani? Using Comrade was expected since the communists came into power, but the traditional form of respect was to address an unknown adult woman as Pani, and for a man it was Pan. A lot of country folk bristled at being called Comrade, but if this woman was a shock worker and I called her Pani, she might report us for counter-revolutionary tendencies. By the time we were about 20 feet away, I had made my decision. "Good morning, Pani," I called out, then held my breath. The woman looked up, startled. She shaded her eyes with one hand, then gave us a smile. "Are you boys hungry?" she asked. I exhaled in relief. I had made the right choice. "We are," said Slavko. "Come into the house, then," she said. We left our shoes outside and followed her in through the back door. A sob caught in my throat as my eyes adjusted to the inside. The peak, the wooden table, sleeping ledges, it was so much like home. And then I saw her atheist's corner. She had the same portrait of Stalin like in our house. Yulia had brought home a papier-mâché replica of the Dershprom that she had made as an art project at school, so it now sat beside the 2 miniature tractors. She had also brought home a cartoon drawing of a fat pig dressed as a Ukrainian and labeled a kulak. But Mama and Tato refused to let her put it on the altar. I burned it in the pich while Yulia was at school. This woman's atheist's corner had a metallic bust of Lenin on one side of Stalin and a small Soviet flag on the other. She saw me staring at it and said, "I just leave that there so I don't get in trouble. I still pray when nobody's around." She walked over to the display and took the items off the little shelf and put them on the floor. She took a bundle from a shelf under the table and unwrapped it, showing me what she had. It was a small embroidered altar runner and a miniature icon of Saint Sophia. She smoothed the runner out onto the wood and set the icon in the middle, then crossed herself and said a quick prayer. She left the altar in place as she walked over to the kitchen area. "May I pray?" I asked her. "A shock worker lives next door, and we don't dare take down our atheist's corner." She brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. "Yes, please pray," she said. I knelt in front of the icon, and Slavko knelt beside me. I said a prayer for the safety of our family and our village, then said another one for our country and all the people in it. I also prayed that Stalin and his people would put the country's needs above their own greed. And then I made the sign of the cross and stood up, grateful for the opportunity to pray. It always cleared my mind. "Sit," she said, pointing to the bench at the table. "You're hungry." It was a statement, not a question. Slavko and I sat on the bench, and the woman set down a glass of milk for each of us. And then, using a sharp knife, she cut a large boiled potato in half, put each piece on a plate, and set them in front of us. She sat across from us, but without milk or potato for herself. The large knife sat on the table in front of her. I lifted my potato half up to my face and breathed in the familiar earthy aroma. "Your grain was taken?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Most of my food as well. What village are you from?" "Filivka," I said. "You've been traveling for 8 kilometers already then. Where are you headed?" "The tractor plant." 3 kilometers to go. My sons are there too, trying to make some money so we can get through the winter. She pointed to my potato piece. "Now eat." We finished our potato and milk and thanked the woman for her generosity. And as we were sitting on the back step, lacing up our shoes, she came out with 2 well-worn straw hats. "Wear these in good health," she said. With that, we were on our way. I knew we were close to the construction site when we began to see more than the occasional buggy or truck, and when that happened, we stepped off the road so we didn't get hit. But once, as I jumped off the road to avoid a dusty black automobile, I nearly landed on a person taking a nap. The car continued down the road, and I got a better look at the person I almost landed on top of. A dark-haired kid about my age. "Sorry about that," I said. "I wasn't expecting someone to be sleeping by the side of the road." I held out my hand. "I'm Neil." "Lev," he said. "Is that your little brother?" he asked, jerking his head towards Slavko. I liked Lev immediately. He realized at first glance that I was the big brother. "I'm not little, and my name's Slavko," said my brother, standing up beside me, trying to make himself taller. "Are you on your way to Tractor Stroy?" Lev asked. "We are going to the tractor factory construction site," I said. "It's called Tractor Stroy," said Lev. "When it's finished, it'll be Tractor Gavod, or the Tractor Works." "Is that where you're going?" I asked. "It is," said Lev. "I've actually been working there for a month already, but my village isn't far from here, so when I have a day off, I come to see my mother if I can." "Do you mind if we walk with you?" I asked. "As long as you don't jump on me again, that would be fine," said Lev. I go the back way into the construction site to avoid the guards at the front. "I thought they were desperate for workers," I said. "They are, but they're officially not supposed to hire kulaks, but really, who else would they hire to work on construction? Only farmers will take their jobs, and who knows how someone gets labeled a kulak. I avoid the situation altogether and just go around the back and bypass the guards. The construction managers don't care who we are. They're mostly Americans. Because we were so close to the construction site, the road was much busier than it had been earlier in the day. So for the next mile, we walked through the scrubland parallel to the road, which made the journey even more exhausting and hot and slow than it already was. Just when I felt like giving up, Lev stopped and pointed to the west. The back of the construction site is one field over this way as the crow flies. We walk straight through it. Slavko and I kept pace with Lev, and soon we could hear a humming and clanging in the distance. A deep mud pit came into view. It was filled with workers and heavy equipment. There were many horses being used to pull the equipment, as well as wagons and flatbeds. Beyond that was a village-sized complex being constructed in a vast field of mud. That job also required a huge number of horses. At the far end of the construction was the widest building I'd ever seen. It seemed to take up the entire horizon. There were smaller buildings jutting out from it, one on the left side, and two longer ones jutting out from the right. They were separated from one another by a wide, muddy field. More horses, more heavy equipment. Now I knew why there was a shortage of horses for farming. Lev made a sweeping motion with his hands to indicate the broad building and its extensions. That entire complex is the tractor plant, he said. Beyond are more than 100 barracks, which is temporary housing for the foreign workers and specialists. What about the regular workers? I asked. You'll see that soon enough, said Lev. We set up wherever we can find a spot. Closer to us were row upon row of 4- and 6-story buildings. I pointed to them. What are those? They're the apartment buildings where the foreign workers and specialists will eventually live. I wonder if Alice will live there with her father, said Slavko. He's a tractor machinist. Once we were through the field, but before we got to the construction site, we arrived at a vast muddy area where exhausted workers were settling down for the evening. The field was peppered with hundreds of different makeshift dwellings, rags tied together and held up with sticks, a hole in the ground lined with newspapers, a wooden stump beside a clay-encrusted blanket. At each of these dwellings, there were people with hollow cheeks and ribs showing through ragged shirts. Sometimes it would be just one person, but most dwellings had several people. I could see men, women, and kids sitting curled in sleep or warming a small pot over a fire. Slavko and I followed Lev as he wove between the various encampments. Finally, he stopped at a mud-encrusted canvas sheet that was rigged up over the top of a strip of cardboard. A kid with blackened bare feet sat cross-legged, stirring something lumpy in a pot. Petro, said Lev. Good to see you're still here. The boy looked up. Took you long enough. How's Mama? She refuses to leave the cohorts and thinks that we should come back. A wave of frustration passed over Petro's face. Then he turned and looked at me and Slavko. Who are your friends, Lev? Neil and Slavko. Can they stay with us? It will be crowded, said Petro. Then he turned to us. Sit. I've got potato stew.